Well, you've done underwater exploration as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What have you done there?
I lived for 2 weeks in the bottom of the sea.
Oh, Jesus. So how do you eventually get out?
It's a freaky thing. It takes about a day. And what you do is so we were living in this habitat, and it was kind of like a submarine on the bottom of the ocean, but it didn't have a motor, so it was just like stuck on the floor, like a big cylinder. And it had a hole cut in the side here. And the only thing that was keeping the ocean out was the air pressure inside.
Whoa.
Kind of like taking a cup and flipping it over, putting it in the bathtub and trapping the air.
Oh, God.
And you just scuba dive on down, and then you swim into that thing. And then once you pop up in that hole, it's like you're in a swimming pool inside the habitat. And then you just step out into the habitat.
Whoa.
Have you ever seen the movie The Abyss?
Yes. It's like that.
It's like that.
Oh.
Yeah.
It seems like if you're not a large person, they might be able to just suck you right in there.
In the year 1931, there was an explorer named Sir Hubert Wilkins who had a big plan. He wanted to be the first person to actually set foot at the North Pole. But getting there was very hard. For a long time, no one knew how to reach the North Pole because it is located in the middle of an ocean covered with thick ice almost all year. Many explorers had tried different ways to get there. First, they used boats, but the ice was too dangerous and the water was cold. Their boats would get stuck in the ice, often with no way to get free. Some explorers then tried using sleds with dogs or walking on foot through the ice and snow. But it was difficult to walk or sled very far, and the cold weather made many explorers get very sick or even die while trying this. The first person to see the North Pole from above was in 1926. But they did not touch the ground. They used a special airship called a dirigible that could fly through the air. Sir Hubert thought there must be a better way. He was an experienced explorer and thought that a submarine would work the best. A submarine could travel under the ocean water and ice when boats and sleds could not. It could protect people from the cold and dangers of being on top of the ice. Sir Hubert wanted to take a submarine called the Nautilus all the way under the Arctic ice to reach the North Pole. This would be the very first time anyone set foot there. Not only would they touch the ground at the North Pole, but the submarine could help learn secrets about what is under the Arctic Ocean ice and water. It would carry special tools to measure ocean temperatures, currents, and more. This scientific information could provide understanding about weather and other Arctic mysteries. So in 1931, Sir Hubert Wilkins came up with a bold plan to take the old submarine Nautilus and prove that a vessel could successfully travel thousands of kilometers under the Arctic ice using a method never attempted before. For his submarine expedition, Sir Hubert Wilkins needed to find a submarine that could be adapted for the challenging Arctic conditions. He chose a retired World War I submarine called the Nautilus that was in need of major updates. This submarine was leased from the United States Navy and modified by a famous naval architect named Simon Lake. Simon Lake knew the Nautilus would have to do things no other submarine ever did before, like travel under thick sea ice. The ice could be very dangerous. During the expedition, there was a risk the submarine could accidentally collide with large ice sheets above it. So Simon Lake reinforced the front of the Nautilus with thick steel plates and concrete. He also installed a special hydraulic shock absorber that could soften the impact if the submarine did bump into ice overhead. Another danger was that heavy pieces of the thick Arctic ice could shift around or fall down from above. These large ice blocks could damage the submarine if they landed on it. So Simon Lake came up with an innovative solution. He fit metal sled runners along the top outer sides of the Nautilus. These would allow the submarine to safely slide along the underside of any floating ice above, like a sled on snow or ice. Simon also attached a hydraulic guided arm to the front that could be extended up to gently keep a safe space between the submarine and any hazards in the ice directly overhead. Since the Nautilus would be traveling for days at a time underneath the dense Arctic ice, it needed a way to occasionally surface up through the ice to replenish air for the crew to breathe and recharge batteries. But there was a risk the ice above might be too thick with no natural openings. So Simon Lake equipped the Nautilus with special ice drilling equipment that could bore a hole of up to 20 feet through very thick ice. This would allow the submarine crew to drill escape paths to fresh air when needed. With these inventive modifications, Simon Lake transformed the old naval submarine Nautilus into a vessel that might be capable of the unprecedented journey under the Arctic ice. The modifications were untested, however, and it remained unknown if they would perform safely as hoped in the extreme Arctic conditions. When the time came for the expedition to depart in March 1931, Sir Hubert Wilkins wanted to put on a confident face for the reporters. He explained that the crew of the submarine Nautilus were doing final checks of equipment before leaving the dockyard to start their journey.
8 months to have made the trip 2,000 miles under the ice, starting from Spitsbergen somewhere about the 1st of July.
Sir Hubert estimated that within about 6 to 8 months, they expected to complete a trip of over 2,000 miles traveling under the Arctic ice. Their plan was to leave in early July from the Svalbard archipelago, located between mainland Norway and the North Pole. From Svalbard, the Nautilus would then head west across the Arctic Ocean, zigzagging under the ice as it searched for openings to surface briefly before the long trip ended in Alaska over 6,000 kilometers away. It was an ambitious goal for the tiny submarine to cross such vast distances below the frozen wastes. However, Sir Hubert did his best to put on a display of certainty for the watching media. In reality, Sir Hubert had deep worries that he kept private. Many of the Nautilus's novel modifications by Simon Lake were completely untested, and some even seemed unnecessary or risky to Sir Hubert. He was unsure about the usefulness of the sled runners along the hull or the complex ice drilling equipment. Most concerning was the hydraulic shock absorber on the front. Sir Hubert feared this device, meant to soften ice impacts, could actually get lodged in the ice and trap the submarine if it collided with an ice sheet. Sir Hubert asked for an electrical sensor to be added that could measure ice thickness from below. This would help the crew decide when it was safe enough to surface up through the ice. However, Simon Lake refused this request as he had final say on any changes. As the submarine was leased from the Navy by Lake, Sir Hubert had little choice but to accept the vessel as it was, despite his unvoiced doubts about some of its experimental and untried features meant for Arctic travel underneath the frozen sea. Even before departing on the expedition, the problems with the Nautilus that Sir Hubert had feared began to arise. Simon Lake's novel modifications were proving troublesome and repeatedly forced the submarine back to port for repairs. The complex and experimental ice drilling equipment that Lake had installed failed during testing and did not work as intended. This was a serious issue, as the ability to drill through thick ice was crucial to the submarine's ability to safely surface when needed. An independent engineering firm had to be brought in to thoroughly examine the drilling system and attempt to resolve its faults. As weeks slipped by consumed with repairs, Sir Hubert began to feel increasing pressure. The expedition was falling badly behind schedule. This delay put achieving one of Sir Hubert's major goals in jeopardy. He had arranged for the Nautilus to meet up with the giant German airship Graf Zeppelin at the North Pole, creating a media sensation by being the first to reach the pole from both above and below. However, if the submarine did not leave soon, it would no longer be possible to make the rendezvous at the appointed date. And Sir Hubert risked losing out on a substantial cash prize he had been promised by William Randolph Hearst, the famous American newspaper magnate, for pulling off this publicity stunt. Hearst was covering the expedition's costs and planned to reap large profits from exclusive publication rights to the adventure. By June, with time slipping away and the ice drilling issue still unresolved, Sir Hubert had no choice but to insist the expedition finally depart, mechanical problems be damned. The delays were endangering the entire venture's success and jeopardizing his financial agreement with Hearst. While the Nautilus set off, deep concerns remained about whether its experimental modifications, like the untested drilling gear, would perform as vital Arctic travel under the ice began. Sir Hubert could only hope the submarine would not let him down in the freezing north. The Nautilus began its voyage by crossing the treacherous North Atlantic Ocean towards the Arctic. Even this early stage of the journey proved immensely challenging for the small and outdated submarine. Powerful storms tossed the tiny vessel around mercilessly, demonstrating the harsh conditions it would soon face under the Arctic ice. The Nautilus was already quite cramped due to its age, but loading it up with supplies and equipment for the expedition made living conditions even more uncomfortable. With over 20 crew members squeezed inside, there was almost no room to move around. Incredibly, there was only a single open-air toilet area between the two noisy diesel engines for all the men to share. Most had to stand for their entire shift due to a severe lack of seating. A few narrow bunks were the sole place for crew members to try and rest. The constant rolling of the submarine caused terrible seasickness throughout the journey for nearly everyone on board. Then, in a truly disgusting situation, the bilge pump malfunctioned and failed to drain away the accumulating sewage, oil, and vomit, leaving it swilling around underfoot where the men had to stand all day. Just 1 week into the crossing, things took an even worse turn. One of the starboard engines suddenly developed a major crack in its fourth cylinder. The Nautilus was forced to limp forward on only a single engine, drastically slowing its progress. Communications with the outside world also cut off when the submarine stopped sending radio updates. For several harrowing days, no one knew its condition or location. Luckily, it was eventually spotted adrift over 1,000 kilometers from its planned route. Both engines had now completely failed, with dead batteries leaving it powerless. In a humiliating development, the Nautilus would need to be towed the rest of the way across the Atlantic by other ships. For crew members even quit at this point, unwilling to continue the ill-fated mission. The breakdown of the Nautilus so far from land caused serious setbacks for the expedition. Upon reaching the Azores Islands, the submarine required extensive repairs that would take weeks to complete. Even worse for Sir Hubert, the delays meant it was no longer possible to meet the scheduled rendezvous with the Graf Zeppelin airship at the North Pole as originally planned. This cost Sir Hubert the lucrative cash prize he had been promised by newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst contingent on this publicity stunt. To add insult to injury, the press began mocking the troubled expedition and openly questioning Sir Hubert's competence. He faced tremendous pressure with his submarine in tatters, the crew demoralized, and the Arctic winter rapidly approaching. At this low point, most expedition leaders would have abandoned the endeavor as a lost cause. But Sir Hubert was a determined explorer who had overcome countless challenges in his career. Even with his dreams of meeting the airship at the pole now shattered, and the Nautilus needing a complete rebuild, he refused to surrender. Sir Hubert was determined to at least make some headway under the Arctic ice, if the submarine could be repaired in time. Finally, by late July, over 2 months behind schedule, repairs were complete and the expedition reloaded supplies. They bade farewell to the Azores and resumed their journey. The crew had gained experience maintaining the temperamental Nautilus along the way, allowing them to fix any new problems that arose during scheduled maintenance stops. Slowly but surely, they closed in on the Arctic Circle through the cold summer months. By mid-August, Sir Hubert began transmitting upbeat progress reports once more. His indomitable spirit seemed to be lifting crew morale again despite all the setbacks. They had at last reached the northern shores of Greenland, the last inhabited land before the vast frozen wastes of the Arctic Ocean. A few days more and the Nautilus would encounter its first ice, the start of Sir Hubert's dream to travel untold miles underneath the polar sea. On August 19, 1931, the crew of the submarine Nautilus spotted the first ice floes of the Arctic Ocean ahead. This marked the beginning of Sir Hubert Wilkins' goal to traverse over 1,000 miles under the frozen sea. To celebrate reaching this milestone, Sir Hubert allowed the men a rare break from the cramped conditions inside the submarine. They emerged onto the top of the ice to collect scientific samples and readings using new instruments. This data, such as discovering a layer of warmer water deep below the surface, provided exciting insights into Arctic weather patterns and wildlife. Newspapers back home eagerly published these discoveries, keeping interest in the expedition strong despite all the problems. For the next week, the Nautilus steadily picked its way through the ice field. The crew navigated using the periscope and steering controls modified for underwater travel. Sir Hubert sent cheerful reports as they progressed further north each day. By August 27th, they had covered over 500 miles under the ice, surpassing any other vessel before in these frigid northern waters. The submarine reached a position of 82 degrees north latitude, higher than any ship had managed on its own power. It seemed Sir Hubert might fulfill his dream of being the first to cross 1,000 miles beneath the Arctic Ocean. However, all was not as it seemed according to later reports. Unbeknownst to the public, conditions inside the Nautilus had become desperately miserable. The aging submarine was never designed for polar exploration and lacked any insulation or heating. Freezing temperatures and miserable dampness took their toll on the crew's health. Food poisoning from tinned provisions was rampant. Even worse, lead poisoning began affecting the men from the solder used in the ship's pipes. As winter approached, the risks of remaining in the icy zone grew each day. Exhausted and sick, the entire crew unanimously wanted to turn back, but Sir Hubert was determined to press on. As the Nautilus continued northwest under the ice, problems with the aging submarine grew more severe. On August 22nd, Sir Hubert gave the order to dive deeper into the freezing Arctic waters. However, when the crew attempted this maneuver, a shocking discovery was made. The all-important diving planes that controlled the submarine's depth failed to respond. A diver was sent out to investigate. He returned with distressing news. The vertical rudder that guided the Nautilus had completely broken off and disappeared. Its loss meant the submarine could no longer safely submerge or surface as needed. Sir Hubert suspected sabotage by the desperate crew, but an accident seemed more likely given the vessel's poor condition. Regardless of the cause, this critical failure left the Nautilus unfit to continue the hazardous journey. Even the expedition's chief promoter, newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst, now urged Sir Hubert by radio to turn back before it was too late. Facing Arctic waters that would soon freeze solid, further travel was simply too dangerous. Yet Sir Hubert remained stubbornly determined to prove the submarine's abilities. Over the next few days, as the crew's health deteriorated further in the freezing temperatures, he stubbornly ordered the Nautilus to plow onward under the ice. Progress now had to be made using only the vessel's limited battery power and steering controls at the ice-water interface. When test drills of the ice finally occurred, it quickly became evident the mission was doomed. Simon Lake's complex drilling system, which had caused so many issues, repeatedly jammed after boring only a short way into relatively thin ice. Without a way to surface, the Nautilus was trapped below the frozen surface. By September 6th, even the indomitable Sir Hubert acknowledged the bitter truth. His Arctic dream had come to an end far from the North Pole. In a radio call, "Our Arctic trip is over. We are returning south at once." The submarine's historic attempt to cross 1,000 miles below the polar ice had ultimately failed due to the challenges faced by its aging design. Sir Hubert Wilkins' attempt to traverse the Arctic Ocean under ice ended up being a disastrous failure that nearly cost the lives of the crew. The expedition financially ruined Sir Hubert, who was left deep in debt after investing his life savings. To make matters worse, the public and press roundly mocked his claim that the Nautilus had traveled over 500 miles beneath the ice. Critics argued there was no way to verify such distances given the submarine's unreliable navigational equipment and lack of clear records during the ordeal. Sir Hubert's reputation as a pioneering explorer was seriously damaged. Despite discovering new insights about Arctic conditions, the expedition ended up overshadowing his previous achievements, like being the first to fly over both poles in an airship. For years afterward, he struggled to secure funding for further exploration projects. While the Nautilus's modifications by Simon Lake were meant to enable Arctic travel under ice, they ultimately contributed to the mission's failure. Problems with the untested drilling gear and other novel systems prevented the submarine from surviving the treacherous conditions as hoped. The expedition demonstrated that neither submarines nor people were truly ready for such a challenging polar voyage in 1931. It would still be decades before nuclear submarines made routine journeys under the Arctic ice possible. Sir Hubert's vision of using a submarine to reach the North Pole was ahead of its time, given the limitations of technology during that era. Though his dream of being first to the pole by traversing over 1,000 miles below the ice ended in disappointment, Sir Hubert paved the way for future under-ice exploration of the Arctic. His courageous efforts expanded scientific knowledge and highlighted the immense difficulties of polar exploration, helping others find safer solutions in decades to come. So that is it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, Please subscribe to our channel for more fascinating videos like this one, and see you in the next video.